This red SUV doesn't just have one of the best plug-in hybrid systems on sale today. This might just be the only mainstream plug-in hybrid that makes sense anymore, even if you rarely charge it. This is the 324 horsepower RAV4 GR Sport. And the plug-in hybrid system doesn't just make sense in this trim, it also makes sense in the SE, the XSE, and the Woodland trims, which is what we're going to talk about today, if you want some extra oomph. If you're looking for the quickest mainstream compact SUV 0 to 60, it is definitely a RAV4, especially since we don't have a V6 engine in this segment anymore, or any high horsepower turbos. This is the answer to both of those questions. And that performance mission is the main reason that this makes sense in a world where the Tucson and Sportage plug-in hybrids no longer make sense. Remember, we don't get the federal tax credit in the US anymore, and that used to make those Hyundai and Kia models, the Outlander and the new Rogue plug-in hybrid, make a great deal of sense, because you could lease a Tucson plug-in hybrid for about the same as a regular Tucson hybrid, and if you plugged it in, you'd save on a lot of gas and you wouldn't have to visit the gas station as often. This has a different sales proposition, and in my mind, it's very similar to the sales proposition we find in the Volvo plug-in hybrid lineup. You get a lot of performance and better fuel economy. So not only is this quicker 0 to 60, and I think arguably more fun than a Mazda 2.5-liter turbo, it gets a whopping 40 miles per gallon, whereas that turbo is down there around 20. So for the same price or less, you could get yourself one of these, and even if you never charged it, you'd still end up saving money and be faster 0 to 60. That's the sales proposition on the RAV4 plug-in hybrid. Now, we're taking a look at the GR Sport, which is the ultimate sport persona in the RAV4. It gets a slightly lowered suspension, a more aggressive front end, tweaked dampers all the way around, and a few fewer features than we find in some of the other plug-in hybrids. We'll talk about all of that in this video. This is obviously the most aggressive front-end design, although I like the one in the Woodland as well. It's trying to be a little bit more Toyota truck in the grille area, and the SE and XSE actually remind me a little bit of a Lexus, with the way that the grille sort of blends into the front bumper design. This is the most aggressive interpretation of RAV4, but we still get very similar LED headlights to the rest of the lineup, and the black bar that runs across right there under that Toyota logo. Whether we're talking about the regular RAV4 or the RAV4 with a plug, the only real problem for me is the size of the RAV4. Otherwise, to be frank, I would probably own one. If the back seats were 3 or 4 inches larger, this would be absolutely fantastic, but as it is one of the smaller entries in this segment, and you will really notice that back here in the rear seat area, where it is tighter than a Tucson or a Sportage. So that is still one reason why you might want to choose one of those other options. But the GR Sport, again, has a different look. We have unique wheels and tires with grippier tires on those wheels, although they're about the same dimension as the ones on the regular RAV4. You'll notice we have a charge door over here on the passenger side. And that's not going to happen in every plug-in RAV4. In some of the models, it's going to be on this side, SE and GR Sport. On some of the trims, XSE and Woodland, it's going to be on the opposite side of the vehicle, on the driver's side. Why they switch sides makes no sense to me at all, but the connectors behind the doors are also going to be different. You're going to get AC charging on this side only in SE and GR Sport, and you're going to get AC and DC charging on the other side if you choose XSE and Woodland. I'm in the shade so you can see the taillights a bit better. We have individual LED light pipes, not just on the outboard elements, but the ones on the hatch as well. We have dual exhaust tips under the bumper, the GR Sport logo there, and a slight tweak to the design for the GR Sport. If there's one thing I would like to see changed, though, it would be the rear windshield wiper moving up here to just underneath the spoiler, because that would give this an even cleaner look out back. To better understand this plug-in hybrid system, I think it's best to compare and contrast it to the second best-selling system in this segment. That's the one in the Sportage and the Tucson. Basically the same system in both of them. On this side of the engine bay, they would have a 1.6-liter turbo. In here, we have a 2.5-liter naturally aspirated engine, no turbo. On that side of the engine bay, they would have a 6-speed automatic transmission. This one doesn't really have a transmission in the traditional sense. It's 2 motor generator units and a single planetary gear set acting like a transmission. If you want to go backwards, it simply spins one of the motors backwards. And it can use those 2 motors to effectively adjust how much power is going from the engine to the wheels mechanically or electrically, and everything works in coordination with the motor in the back to give you 324 horsepower. That's a serious bump over the 268 horsepower in the Hyundai and the Kia. In the Hyundai and the Kia, the power bump just compensates for the added curb weight. It's a hair faster than the regular hybrid, but it's not a big deal. This is a significant amount faster. This is the quickest entry in this segment with a 0 to 60 under 5 seconds. And it's going to give you 54 miles of electric range, not 32, and 40 miles per gallon when the battery is exhausted, not 35 to 36 over there in the Hyundai and the Kia. This, however, does not have a mechanical all-wheel drive system. Instead, in the back, we get a 54 horsepower electric motor that's good for around 89 pound-feet of torque. Most of the 324 horsepower is happening up front. So it definitely is a bit of a wild ride on the right surface compared to some of those mechanical all-wheel drive systems in this segment. But again, significantly more powerful than every other entry in this segment, including those larger displacement turbos like we find in the Mazda lineup. Now, some of you are rightly thinking, hang on, this one does not get 54 miles of electric range, and you would be correct. This is the GR Sport version, which drops the electric range down to 48 miles and also impacts the fuel economy. That almost entirely has to do with the tires. These are grippier tires than we find on the regular RAV4 plug-in hybrid, the SE, XSE, and the Woodland, and that's the big reason that the efficiency drops a bit. But there are some other changes. The SE, which is the least expensive way to get your plug-in hybrid RAV4, and the GR Sport, the most expensive, interestingly, both share the low output AC charger, 7 kilowatts, with the charge door over here on the passenger side. Why is that? Well, coordinating factors. The SE is the least expensive model, so logically they use the least expensive parts. Why do they use that on the GR Sport? Well, because the GR Sport has so many other changes, they didn't want to take the price tag through the roof. So they went back to the less expensive charger and the charge port over there on that side with the SE. The XSE and the Woodland, those get a CCS connector to allow you to DC fast charge your battery 10% to 80% in 30 minutes. I don't understand who would ever want to do that, but if it's you, then you want to get the XSE or the Woodland trim. Getting 70% of your charge, which is only 54 miles in 30 minutes, is not really a winning proposition to me. I would rather just plug in at an AC station or utilize the 40 mile per gallon fuel economy in the hybrid system. But hey, you do you, and I would love to know if that is of interest at all to you down there in the comment section. I think I would rather have a system that cost, I don't know, a few $100 less instead of having that CCS port. Interestingly, this is not just one of the most efficient entries in its segment when running on gasoline, it's also one of the most efficient when running on electricity. And that's how it gets to 54 miles of electric range, or 48 in this one, while having just an 18 kilowatt hour battery pack. That is smaller than some of the competition. It also allowed them to reduce the curb weight versus some of those other options. This is still heavy, but it's only about 600 pounds heavier than the regular hybrid, and under this load floor, it retains something that you don't really see in plug-in hybrids. We have a spare tire under here. Now, admittedly, this is not a full-size spare tire, and it sticks up a little bit higher than the load floor because of the way they had to redesign the floor pan back here in the rear of the vehicle, which is why we have this weird little funky thing underneath the spare tire. But it has one, and they've even carved out a little bit of additional storage right there in the middle. If I lower the floor, you'll notice what's going on, maybe. We actually get a slight little ramp up into the cargo area right here. The slight increase in cargo area height is the reason the cargo capacity drops versus the regular RAV4 from 37.5 cubic feet down to 33.6. But importantly, we squeezed the same 6 24-inch roller bags in here that we did in the regular RAV4. You just don't have room for a full-size spare tire, even if you wanted to, without really destroying the cargo area, because it just won't fit under the floor, like it will in the regular RAV. Other than that, the interior is basically the same. We get very subtly tweaked front seats, not a big difference there, and the amount of room that we find inside is the exact same as the regular RAV4, which means the front seats are very comfortable. If I adjust this seat all the way down, I have a reasonable amount of headroom. We don't have a moonroof here in this model, but the back seats, those are a little bit tight. Due to a very slight rearrangement of the interior versus the previous generation RAV4, I was able to fit my daughter's child seat behind me driving. It wasn't the most comfortable, but I didn't have to move as far forward as I had to in the previous generation RAV4. Let me go ahead and remove this though so you can see what's going on. With that seat still in position for me driving the vehicle, I'll go ahead and move over. You'll notice we definitely have a lot less room than we find in a Sportage or a Tucson. And that is the one thing to keep in mind. And really for me, the only deal breaker in the RAV4 if you have kids in rear-facing seats, especially if they're in those larger rear-facing seats that they have to sit in practically until they're, I don't know, teenagers these days. So here we have about 4 or 5 inches of legroom left. You'd find definitely more in the Tucson and Sportage. You would find a slightly wider back seat in some of those other options, but it's not a big difference. And of course, something like a Jeep Cherokee is going to be even longer than this. With this front seat most of the way back in its tracks, I had a 6'5" person sitting there. You can see I have less legroom going on there. But overall, pretty comfortable in the back seat, and headroom is definitely very generous. I have, I don't know, almost 3 inches of headroom. That's because A, we don't have that sunroof in this model, but also B, because the RAV4 is pretty upright and boxy. The rear seats have a bit of recline to them, so you can move this seat. Looks like about 2 inches or so. We have armrest right there in the middle. That's where you'll find the cup holders for the back seats, and the shoulder belt comes out of the seat back, not out of the ceiling, something I really prefer, especially versus those Subaru models. And the rear seat is wide enough that you can put some of those smaller child seats right here in the middle and still comfortably sit on either side. Rear seat passengers get 2 USB-C charge ports in the middle and air vents below. You can see that we have a relatively flat floor, but it's not entirely flat. We do have a slight hump there. The child seat situation is basically the same as the regular RAV4, latch anchors that are easy to find there, no doors or flaps. And the center buckle doesn't come out of the seat as far as some, so I was able to use a base station in the center position safely with that shoulder belt, which is not something you can do in all of the competition. The grille might be bold up front, but on the inside, the changes for the GR Sport are relatively minor. We still have the telematics buttons up here, sunglass holder right there, pull-out extension, not slide to the side sun visors for the driver and front passenger, and 4 grab handles, but you'll notice no moonroof. That was logically to help reduce the weight and of course help reduce the cost as well for those other GR specific components. We have the GR badge embroidered there on the head restraint, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and 2-way adjustable head restraints. We have this combination imitation leather and suede-like insert in the seat, sort of a microfiber setup there with the red piping. These are really nice grippy seats, and I appreciate the fact that they're still heated, although sadly they are not ventilated in this model. Even though they are perforated, you can see the perforations right there in the middle. And if we zoom in on the perforations, maybe down there on the seat bottom cushion, it's difficult to see, but there's actually a red accent on the inside of those perforations. So in some light, you'll really notice that. Here in the darkness, you don't notice it quite so much. The rest of the interior design, very much like the rest of the RAV4 lineup. So on the front doors, the upper portion is made from softer materials than the lower portion, as you'd logically expect. We have nicely positioned grips right there, decent amount of storage down there at the bottom. Then on the dashboard, we have the same sort of storage slot in the middle, hard plastics right there, soft touch in the middle, hard plastic again. The glove compartment is a smallish bin. I wouldn't be able to fit a larger tablet computer inside, but speaking of tablets, oh my, we have a really big one here on the dashboard. This is one of the better implementations of smartphone integration in my opinion, because you can use so much of the screen for it and it just simply is larger than average. I like the slightly taller aspect ratio versus what we find in the Sportage and in the Tucson. The software has also been changed for this generation. It looks much like the previous generation, but we get better screens for things like your battery and your range right there. We also get better animation, so if I change the drive mode, for instance, to the Eco and the Sport mode, we get better graphics here, and we get better graphics over there on the instrument cluster as well. That's probably the bigger change, is that instrument cluster. This one really makes the system that we find in the Sportage and the Tucson feel old, because we have a really good implementation of 2-screen CarPlay. So if you don't want to use the built-in maps or pay for that to be updated, you can actually 2-screen right there. We get a bunch of different ways to look at our power delivery or our all-wheel drive system settings and things like that. Now, I will say one complaint is that Toyota still splits some vehicle settings in this display and in this display over here, and that can be a bit confusing. But I like the size of this screen, and I like the fact that we still have some physical buttons below, even though a lot of the climate control options are in here. So for instance, climate options there, the ability to link your AC to the auto mode, for instance, that's there as well, the eco mode, but pretty easy to use, especially if you like automatic climate control where you're just really going to be fiddling with the temperature buttons. Below that, we get 2 big air vents and a redesigned center console that feels more premium than the last generation plug-in RAV4. Over here, we have the drive mode selector and the auto hybrid EV mode right there. So that allows you to choose auto, EV mode priority, or hybrid priority. Here we have a Qi wireless charging mat. We have a blank spot over there. The trail mode over here, I always thought that was weird that those two are split. Down here we have another little storage nook where you can put those larger smartphones, 2 15-watt power outlets. I kind of appreciate the fact that they actually tell you what the output of those ports is. We then get 2 cup holders there, nicely sized, auto brake hold, parking brake there, pretty traditional shifter. And then the center armrest opens either side to this storage area, and you can turn it over to use as a hard tray. So you can actually undock it, flip it over, and then use that side instead of the softer side. This storage area is pretty deep. I've got a bunch of camera gear in there, and then that's where we find the USB interface port for the infotainment system if you don't want to go wireless. Back on the driver's side, we have the GR logo down there at the bottom of the pretty typical Toyota steering wheel. It's one of their newer designs. We have this 4-way joystick style control for that instrument cluster over there, volume up, down, track forward, backward. Controls for our adaptive cruise control with the aggressive lane centering right there, and kind of an unusual little icon for those hands. I will say that the driver monitoring system is pretty obtrusive, and I found myself turning it off just as I have in the latest Volvo models. Over here we have the turn signal stalk and the controls for the headlights. All right, it's time to get this out on the road. We're in EV mode, completely floored. The gasoline engine won't turn on if it's in this mode, but it will scoot to 60 in 8.3 seconds. That's not bad. It is significantly slower than hybrid mode, which does it in 4.99 seconds at its best, and the average of 5.1 seconds. That is a really, really quick 0 to 60 time. But even in EV mode, it feels very drivable because low-end torque is really good. If I slow down to, say, around 20 miles an hour and floor it again, it feels very peppy. It's really around 45 miles an hour or so where it starts to run out of steam. If you want to pass someone out on the highway, it's going to take some time, and if you want to pass someone on a highway mountain pass, that's going to take even longer. Or you simply press this little button right down here, put it in the auto mode, and then when you floor it, the gasoline engine turns on and you get a whole heap ton more power and some torque steer. Interestingly, there's not enough oomph on the front to give us torque steer when it's in EV mode, but when it's in gasoline mode, you definitely get a wild ride on the front because we don't have a mechanical connection to the back, and there's just so much power happening up front. It's about 55 horsepower, about 90 pound-feet of torque in the back, not a huge amount. Up front, though, we get the balance of that up to 324. Now, bearing in mind that the GR Sport is the sportiest version of the plug-in hybrid, and it deletes features like the moonroof right there to try and reduce a bit of weight, the stopping distance and the acceleration scores are going to be the best in this versus something like the Woodland or the XSE trim. It took this model just 111 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour. That is actually shorter than the last RAV4 hybrid that we tested because this one has Dunlop SP Sport tires on it. 235 in width, so the same sectional width as the regular RAV4 tires, but definitely a stickier tire. And tires really make a big difference in the way the vehicle feels out on the road. Unfortunately, the way the brakes feel is the exact same as in the regular RAV4. They didn't dial up the sporty feel, so sometimes these brakes feel just a little artificial, and you certainly have to press harder into them to really stop in those shorter distances. In casual driving, it feels fine. Slightly sporty driving, you find yourself going, whoopsie, I need to press on that pedal a little bit longer than I thought. That is something you don't see very often. Just razor scooter, just tooling down the winding road. Anyway, back to this one and the braking feel. It is definitely better in some of the competition, but I think they did a really good job with the suspension tuning here. And those grippier tires really give this a different personality than the rest of the RAV4 lineup, more so than I had thought. Again, still a lot of power on the front, but when the road gets tighter and smaller, this feels more nimble than the curb weight would otherwise indicate, and you can definitely have a lot of fun. The system is also smart enough to send more torque and more power to the rear axle in those corners to give it a little bit of a push around the rear, unless of course you dig deeper in the throttle. This is interestingly happiest on small roads like this, where the speeds are low, and when you're digging into it, it can shuttle that power to the rear to give it just a really slight rear power bias versus the front. Limited situations, of course, only. Handling, I'll give this an A- because the tires really make the difference here. Yes, there are a few options that are going to handle better than this, but this has the package of a lot of thrust and still pretty decent handling. When it comes to ride quality, I'm going to give this model a B+. It handles these potholes really nicely, And yes, even though it is a little bit firmer than the rest of the RAV4 lineup, it's not a world of difference, honestly, because importantly, we may have GR logos everywhere, but this is a GR Sport, it's not a full-on GR. So we do get some suspension tweaks, but they are tweaks, they're not a reinvention of the suspension geometry, not a completely different personality. This is just a slightly firmer RAV4. Once upon a time in this segment, a few options offered V6s and a few offered high horsepower turbos, but those days are pretty much over. The Mazda CX-50 still offers a turbo that's really lovely, but it's mated to a 6-speed automatic that lets it down just a little bit. Also, it doesn't have an independent rear suspension, and the new CX-5, which does have an independent rear, doesn't offer the turbo, at least not yet. That turbo is a lot of fun, but this is actually quicker 0 to 60, stops shorter than that CX-50, and actually pulls a few more Gs on a skid pad than that CX-50 as well. It's the feel that just needs to be tweaked a little bit, I think, to better earn that GR logo. Makes a lot of sense to me in the Woodland trim XSE and SE though. It's the GR, I think, that just bugs me just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. Now, as far as cabin noise goes, we got 65 decibels here at 50 miles an hour, 1 decibel quieter than the hybrid model. Don't know why that is, it's probably just the tire compound. I'd honestly expected these tires to be a little bit louder, but they are in fact just a little bit quieter. Now to the fuel economy. According to the EPA, we should be averaging 37 mpg and get 48 miles of electric range. Now, we have been getting about 48 miles of electric range, but on the fuel economy side of things, we've been averaging 41.5 miles per gallon. That is really pretty good, especially considering the regular hybrid got 43.5 when we last tested it, and this is really pretty similar to the non-plug-in hybrid RAV4. There are very few compromises for the extra 600 pounds of curb weight this model is carrying. Now, part of that might be that I live in a hilly area, and this is better able to soak up the electrons going downhill, and the regular RAV4's battery would be completely full before I got to the bottom of the hill. But even in our relatively level highway test loop, this still punched above its average in terms of its fuel economy running on gasoline only. You will get a slightly lower score just because of the tires that we have here, but it's not a world of difference. There's very, very little compromise for this plug-in hybrid system. With Jeep suddenly ditching the plug-in hybrid market, the RAV4 plug-in, because now Prime is dead, is most likely the best-selling plug-in hybrid in the United States. And it's certainly, in my opinion, the absolute best. Really, if there's only one thing I could change with the RAV4, and that would be to insert just a few inches between the front seats and the back seats to make that rear seat compartment just a little bit bigger. Maybe Grand RAV4, RAV4 Plus, something like that. And I know everybody's going to say, hey, what about a Crown Signia? It's not big enough on the inside. It's actually not really any larger on the inside in that critical dimension for child seats and adult legs, etc., than the RAV4. In fact, I find the Crown Signia just a little odd, and there's no plug-in hybrid Crown Signia there either. The Venza actually had the same problem because it was just a RAV4. It wasn't actually any bigger. And the Highlander has now gone electric. So it is interesting that if you don't fit in the RAV4, you have to jump all the way up to a Grand Highlander. It's a pretty big jump in Toyota's lineup. But we're here to talk about the RAV4, specifically the plug-in hybrid model. There's not a lot of competition, and that's what's interesting. Now, on the pricing chart, a whole bunch of you are probably going to be like, why is there a CR-V on there? That's because there is technically a California-only plug-in hybrid, and when I've excluded that from the list, everybody's like, hey, but what about the RAV4 competition from Honda? Well, it's a hydrogen plug-in hybrid, so it doesn't really count. Let's just be honest there. Now, we do have a plug-in hybrid Rogue, but this is a weird one because for the moment, the one you'll buy right now, that is basically a Mitsubishi Outlander, which is also a Rogue, only this has not Nissan's upcoming plug-in hybrid system that maybe will happen in the US. It's Mitsubishi's plug-in hybrid system in a Rogue that looks like a Rogue, not like a Mitsubishi. Anyway, that's what's going on. The big competitor here, though, I think for this is the Tucson and the Sportage, because they're available with plug-in hybrid systems from regular mainline manufacturers. So you're not really risking as much, I think mentally, as you might getting a Mitsubishi Outlander, because what's their future? Who knows? At any rate, also the Kia Sorento, which interestingly is that little bit bigger, even though it has a third row in the back. So let's dive into the competition. And I'm actually just going to toss Tucson and Sportage and Sorento here into the same bucket. And this really is the competition for the RAV4 plug-in hybrid. We're going to expand out in just a second, though. For these three vehicles, the main thing to know is that these are rational, pragmatist plug-in hybrid systems. You get a little bit more power, it just largely compensates for the added weight, as I keep saying, so really it's not exactly exciting. They're going to shift some of your consumption over to electricity. Not everybody is a fan of the way that Hyundai and Kia have decided to engineer that system, where if you press on the accelerator pedal more aggressively, it's going to turn on the engine. If it's too cold outside, it's going to turn on the engine, etc. But it is pragmatic in that efficiency is very high, and the driving feel is very normal because it has a regular 6-speed auto. And fuel economy is pretty decent. Also, it has a classic all-wheel drive system, a mechanical one. Now, here again, disclaimers, because some people get confused. Capability-wise, yes, the RAV4's all-wheel drive system has turned out to be pretty capable in successive software generations, but it's never going to have the feel of a mechanical system, and it's never going to excel at all situations like a mechanical system, which is why you'll notice we don't have a TRD version of the RAV4 like we had before, the more aggressive TRD, I should say. That's because Toyota says it just can't do that, and that's why at the launch event we could not drive it on the off-road course like we were able to the last time we had a more aggressive TRD version of the RAV4. They admit it's just not quite there. Most situations you're not going to notice it. We're talking deep sand, mud, snow, certain icy surfaces. You're going to notice the front tires are going to need to spin up in order to send power to the rear, and they're going to have to stay spinning in order to get power to the rear axle, which can cause the front axle to dig in a little bit more on those surfaces. Now, on the rest of the surfaces you'll encounter, gravel roads, off-road situations, etc., there's not a whole heap of difference. That's the important thing. Really, the big thing here is the Sorento, which is a little on the pricey side, mind you, $49,435 for its plug-in hybrid system versus $43,000 for the RAV4. That's really the interesting twist with the RAV4 plug-in. I think a lot of folks did not expect it to be as affordable as it actually is. And that's what takes us to the next, I guess, most logical competitor. What if you wanted to cross-shop this against a Mazda CX-50 or a CX-5? We're gonna have to go with CX-50, although we're gonna shove these both here in this category. The reason I'm putting them both here is because there are obvious pros and cons. The CX-5 does not get the turbo that the CX-50 does, and the CX-50 doesn't get a fully independent suspension like the CX-5 does, nor does it get the new interior. So definitely two different sides of the Mazda coin there. Now, neither one of these is plug-in hybrids. We're talking now about performance and fun factor. That's the interesting part with the RAV4 plug-in hybrid. It's about the same price as some of these other options. $51,070 fully loaded gets you, that GR Sport model. That's less than a fully loaded Rogue plug-in hybrid. It is also, looking down the list here, less than a fully loaded Sorento, less than a fully loaded Outlander plug-in hybrid. But it's a very different kind of beast. It is definitely the quickest entry in this segment, decently quicker than the turbo CX-50, which otherwise is one of the more powerful entries. And you'll save a lot of cash. That's the interesting part. You'll be saving $750 to $1,000 a year on fuel versus that turbo CX-50. It's a big enough deal that over the average ownership cycle, the RAV4 plug-in hybrid is going to be cheaper to keep around even if you never plug it in, simply because we have so much more power. Now, is that a waste? Some would say yes, some would say no. The reality here is, in order to get the 300 horsepower out of the system and the performance, we need the bigger battery pack. And if you have the bigger battery pack, you might as well stick a plug on it so people can plug it in if they want to. That's probably the best way to look at it if you're cross-shopping it against a non-hybrid. Of course, logically, you should just go ahead and plug it in because you're going to save even more cash and you won't have to visit the gas station nearly as often. What's really interesting about the RAV4 plug-in hybrid is that it compares really well against a Lexus NX plug-in hybrid. I'd actually rather get the RAV4. I think it looks a little bit better. We get the more modern infotainment system and the more modern software than the NX plug-in hybrid. I think that actually compares pretty well against its competition anyway, but RAV4 I think does better for itself. Also, you could logically cross-shop this against a Buick or, maybe a Lincoln Nautilus if you didn't need a back seat the size of a Lincoln Nautilus, because the performance is actually better than that Lincoln. It's a lot less expensive. The Lincoln Corsair would have been the more natural corollary. It sailed off into the sunset, not available anymore. Certainly versus an Acura RDX though, the RAV4 actually has more bells and whistles, doesn't handle as well, but is going to be a lot less expensive to keep around, more fuel efficient, and quicker in the stoplight races. So let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, because for me,
The RAV4 is so close to perfection, it hurts to say I would not buy one. I would never be able to get a current generation RAV4 because I have young children in child seats. Well, I have one child and another one on the way here. They're going to have to be in a child seat too. And there is just no way to fit a child seat behind me driving the vehicle, let alone another one on the passenger side in the RAV4. Just not if you're 6 feet tall or over, not safely, and certainly not for extended rear facing. That's really the only bummer in the RAV4. But if your kids are already forward facing, or you don't have kids, then absolute slam dunk, just get yourself a RAV4. Thanks, see you later.